I opened the door and saw a boy and a wolf sitting next to him. It didn't attack, didn't run, it was guarding him. What happened next made me cry. When I heard a lone wolf howling somewhere beyond the black wall of spruce, my heart simply stopped, because I knew, with a certainty I still cannot explain, that he was calling to someone, and it was not another wolf. I had come here to lose myself. 50 winters behind me, 2 failed marriages, 1 heart attack that left a zipper of scar tissue down my chest, all the numbers that say a man should stay home and rest. Instead, I booked a freight train, then a battered truck, then a rattling boat upriver, until the world of roads and cell towers fell away and only the taiga remained. Somewhere over this endless sea of conifers was the Arctic Circle, beneath every boot print, permafrost older than nations. I told myself I needed silence, the honest kind that presses in on your eardrums and makes you hear your own blood moving. The cabin I'd borrowed was an old ranger's post, 1 room, wood-burning stove, a cot that creaked like an arthritic knee. That evening the sky dimmed all at once, as if some giant pinched out the sun between finger and thumb. No breeze, no bird song, only that delicate hissing of snow beginning to form, but not yet falling. I stood on the frost-slick porch, mug of weak tea steaming in my fist, and felt wonderfully small. Then something moved. At first it was only the sensation of motion, a ripple at the far edge of vision where trunks blurred into twilight. I blinked, thinking it a trick of fatigue. The ripple became shape, the shape became muscle, and the muscle stepped free of the trees into the crease of moonlight that passed for a clearing. Gray shoulders rolled beneath a coat so thick it seemed armored. Long legs planted one deliberate print after another, as if the earth might crack under anything less cautious. A wolf, yes, but not the half-starved slinkers I'd glimpsed years ago in Yellowstone, darting like ghosts near dumpsters. This one radiated composure, gravity, an authority bigger than his own body. He halted dead center of the clearing and looked straight at me. I had hunted elk, guided tourists, patched bullet holes in poachers' trucks, yet that gaze stripped every credential from my hide. His eyes were the color of wet cedar and seemed to hold 2 separate fires, one savage, one impossibly gentle. I knew I should step back inside, close the door, reach for the flare gun at least. Instead, I found myself rooted, the way a child stares at lightning, half terror, half worship. My breath clouded, drifted, vanished. The porch boards groaned with the pounding in my chest. Seconds, or a century, passed. The wolf's ears twitched, as though catching a distant note in a melody I was too human to hear. He turned his head, not away from me but past me, toward the dark river bending north beyond the ridge. Then, without hurry, he trotted into the trees and let night swallow him. No rustle, no snapped twig, nothing but silence knitting itself closed like skin over a wound. I exhaled so hard my knees sagged. Adrenaline left a metallic taste on my tongue. For a long minute I stood there, hoping, oddly, that he would return, needing proof the moment was real. But the clearing stayed empty. Eventually the cold found its way through my jacket, and practicality reclaimed its throne. Just an animal, I told myself while latching the door, a curious loner, maybe drawn by the smell of dinner. Still, as I spooned congealed beans out of a tin, my ears strained for any sound beyond the pop of the stove. I told myself stories, perhaps a sick wolf thrown from his pack. Perhaps age had dulled his caution. Perhaps I had simply imagined the intelligence in that gaze. Ordinarily, those rationalizations lull me to sleep the way tide pulls a dinghy from shore. Tonight they rattled like empty cans tied to a bumper. I lay on the cot fully clothed, boots unlaced but still on, headlamp beside the pillow. Moonlight bled through the single window in a rectangular bruise. Each time wind nudged the eaves I jolted upright, convinced paw steps padded across the snow. More than once I eased to the door and pressed an ear to the seam. Nothing, nothing, always nothing. Yet the feeling remained that somewhere in the timber a consciousness circled, weighing me against some private ledger. Sometime past midnight the stove settled with a sigh, and in that lull I caught it again, one deep, resonant howl rolling over the canopy, not menacing, not mournful, but purposeful. It rose, held, and spiraled down into quiet. A summons. My skin pebbled as though I were the one being called. Dawn finally seeped under the doorframe. I brewed chicory coffee, hands shaking so badly I spilled most of the grounds. Outside, the clearing lay pristine, unmarked by claw or hoof, as if the night had pressed a perfect reset. Blue smoke from the chimney climbed into a sky scrubbed clean by pre-dawn frost. I almost convinced myself the previous evening had been a waking dream, until I stepped off the porch and saw the snow beyond the packed dirt. There, in a neat arc around the cabin, ran a single track of prints, large, oval, front toes splayed just a little wider than the hind. I bent and touched one. The ice crystals were fresh, edges sharp, made not an hour earlier. They circled the cabin twice, then veered toward the river, exactly the direction the wolf had studied before vanishing. That was when comprehension struck like a hammer on bone. He hadn't been lost. He hadn't been curious. He had been searching, and last night he had come back to stand guard over something I could not yet see. I straightened, heart thundering anew, the early light suddenly too bright for comfort. In that instant, every logical explanation crumbled, and a single impossible question took its place. What was the wolf trying to tell me? I decided he was just a beast acting on instinct. I told myself the prints proved nothing, that the howl was mere coincidence. And yet, as the sun climbed and the forest woke around me, a sharper certainty lodged in my gut. The real story had only begun. I thought the night visit was the end of it, but by the next morning I understood. The wolf had been speaking, and I had failed to listen. A faint rustling, no louder than a moth's wing, lifted me out of a dreamless doze. Gray dawn seeped through the curtains like smoke. I lay still, listening. There it was again. Scrape, pause, scrape, right outside the door, deliberate as knuckles on wood. For a heartbeat I feared the wolf had returned alone, testing the latch. Then came a single, hesitant knock. I reached the door in 2 strides, heart banging so hard it drowned my breath. I swung it open, and the world tilted. A boy, maybe 8 years old, barefoot on snow-dusted boards, cheeks raw with cold, stared up at me. His hair stuck out in icy tufts. Behind him, filling the doorway's bottom half, sat the wolf. The beast's chest rose and fell in a silent rhythm, yellow eyes fixed on mine, unblinking. For 3 long seconds none of us moved. Vapor drifted from the boy's lips. The wolf's breath curled from his nostrils, ribboning the air between us. My hand clenched the doorframe so tight the wood creaked. I managed a whisper. "Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head. He helped me. His voice was thin, hoarse, as if he'd spoken to no one for a century. Something inside me lurched, another rule of nature shrugging off its chains. I glanced at the wolf. He didn't twitch, didn't lower his gaze, didn't bare a tooth. He simply waited. I swallowed. "Come in, son. It's warm inside." The boy's gaze flicked to the wolf, seeking permission, and only then did he step over the threshold. Snow melted instantly beneath his feet, leaving wet footprints on the pine boards. I opened my mouth to wave the wolf away. Instinct, habit, self-preservation. But the words died, because the wolf stayed exactly where he was, half inside, half outside, body blocking the gap like a sentry carved from living stone. He watched me pull a blanket from the cot and wrap it around the child's shoulders. Only after the boy shivered once, twice, did I realize the animal's ears had flattened, not in threat but in careful concentration, as though cataloging each movement for signs of danger. To the boy, not to himself. "What's your name?" I asked, kneeling. My knees popped like rifle cracks. "Toby," he whispered. "How did you get here, Toby?" He hugged the blanket tight. "Got lost. Daddy couldn't find me." His lip quivered, but he didn't cry. It got dark. I was so cold. Then he came. A tiny thumb jerked toward the doorway. He lay next to me and I felt warm. When the sun showed a little, he pushed me with his nose, like telling me to walk, and he brought me here. I stared at the child, then at the wolf. A gust stirred the firs outside. Snow tumbled off a limb in a silent cascade. The wolf's ears flicked, but he didn't rise. "You're not afraid of him?" I murmured, forcing calm. Toby met my eyes, steady as a judge. Number he kept me alive. Those words carved a hollow beneath my ribs. Every wilderness manual I'd ever memorized, every training lecture on predator behavior. Ashes now. This was something older, deeper, immune to textbooks. I shuffled back to the stove, tossed on logs, sparks leaping like fireflies. Heat blossomed. The boy's shoulders relaxed. The wolf still hadn't crossed the sill. It hit me that he would not enter uninvited, as though some boundary mattered to him as much as it did to us. I figured the danger ended once the child was inside, I thought. Fool that I was. Surely the wolf will fade into the trees now, mission complete. But the forest had written a harsher script, and I was only learning my first lines. I filled a mug with lukewarm broth, handed it to Toby. He sipped, lids drooping in relief. I poured another, stepped to the doorway, and, hands shaking, set the cup on the plank before the wolf. An absurd gesture, but the only language I had. He sniffed the steam, then looked up, and in his eyes I read something that buckled my knees. Recognition. He knew this ritual meant peace. He didn't drink. He returned his gaze to Toby, as if confirming the boy's safety. Only then did he stand, slow, deliberate, and back away into the dawn. Snow muffled every step. At the tree line he paused, turned his head over one shoulder, and our eyes locked again. In that gaze was a sentence I couldn't translate, only feel. "I will return, if needed." Then he slipped between the trunks and was gone. Silence rained down, heavy as snowmelt. I shut the door with a hand I barely controlled and leaned my forehead against the cold wood. Who was this child, wandering the taiga alone? How far had he traveled? And what covenant bound him to a creature men still label monster? Behind me, Toby whispered as if sensing my confusion. "He said I'd be safe with you." My spine prickled. How could he tell you that? The boy's eyelids drooped. Exhaustion folded him in two. Before sleep claimed him, he breathed a final fragment of impossibility. He didn't speak. I just knew. I watched him curl on the cot, blanket rising and falling in tiny breaths, and the cabin seemed suddenly too small for the mystery it contained. The questions pressed against the walls like roots lifting a foundation. Outside, the pale sky brightened, innocent, indifferent. But somewhere beyond the frost-blurred window, a guardian moved through shadows, bound by motives I could neither fathom nor deny. And until I understood why that wolf had chosen this boy and this cabin, no door felt thick enough to keep the unknown at bay. Toby slept for nearly an hour, then woke coughing, dry, rasping, the sound of a throat scraped by cold air and panic. I poured warm water, eased him against the pillow, and waited. He stared into the stove's glow, as though trying to decide whether what had happened to him belonged to day or night. "Tell me, son," I said, keeping my voice low. "How did you end up out there alone?" He rubbed one wrist across his eyes and began. He and his father had driven north at dawn, following a 2-track logging road until the ruts filled with puddles and the truck could go no farther. The air smelled of wet moss and chanterelles, golden treasure for city restaurants, his dad liked to say. They carried canvas sacks and a tin whistle the man would blow every half hour so the boy could find him if they drifted apart. It was fun at first, Toby murmured. The forest felt friendly. He pinched the blanket's edge like kneading clay. Then the clouds came too fast, like they were chasing us. His father, intent on a cluster of mushrooms farther uphill, waved Toby to keep picking. The boy stooped to pry a pale cap from the duff. When he straightened, the trees had rearranged themselves, hiding his father's orange vest. A wind rose, hard and sudden, shaking sleet out of the sky. The tin whistle sounded once, thin and distant, then the gale swallowed it. Toby called back. No answer. He ran the direction he thought he'd seen the vest, but the forest shifted with every dozen steps, blurring trunks into walls. Sleet hammered his ears. Needles stung his cheeks. He tried following footprints, yet the ground turned to white slurry, prints drowning in seconds. I yelled till my throat hurt, he said, voice barely above a breath. I thought Daddy would hear, but the wind kept pushing the words away. He wandered in widening spirals, believing he'd find the logging ruts, until a root snagged his boot and flung him face first into moss. Mud chilled his shirt. He rolled onto his back and watched treetops whip against a sky the color of slate. Daylight bled out fast. Blue turned gunmetal, then tar. At that moment, a grown man might curse or pray. Toby did both in one ragged sob, then curled under a fallen cedar bough for shelter. Ice pellets pinged on wood. His fingers went numb, then his lips. He tried counting to stay awake, but lost the numbers somewhere after 30. I thought, this is where people freeze, right here, he whispered. So I lay as small as I could and waited. Minutes, maybe hours, passed. The storm's fury guttered, leaving a hush thick enough to hear snowflakes land. And in that hush came footfalls, soft, measured, too heavy for a rabbit, too silent for a human boot. Toby tensed, ready to scream or run, but his body was snow-heavy. A shape emerged from darkness, long muzzle, rime-frosted fur, eyes like reflected hearthlight. The wolf stopped a pace away and looked at him, not at his throat, not at the easy prey his small body offered, but straight into his eyes, as though acknowledging an equal. I was so cold I couldn't even be scared, Toby said, voice cracking. I just wanted someone to know I was there. The wolf padded closer, lowered himself onto his belly beside the boy, and pressed his flank against the thin jacket. Heat radiated through layers. Toby felt tremors leave his muscles, replaced by a stunned warmth. Snow continued to fall, covering them both in a quiet quilt. The beast's breath fogged and drifted, scented with the wild secrets. He didn't do anything, the child said, amazement blooming across his face even now. He was just there, and I wasn't afraid anymore. That single sentence punched the air from my lungs. How many nights had I, a grown man, wished for that simple miracle, someone simply there. Toby's story rolled on. A squeal shattered the calm, a wild boar rooting blindly through drifts, driven by the same hunger that drives bullets. The wolf rose, body a low gray bowstring, and placed himself between predator and child. No growl, no snarl, just presence, large and immovable. The boar huffed, stomped, then wheeled away, as if meeting a wall it could not breach. The storm eased. Dawn painted frost on every needle. The wolf nudged Toby to his feet, circled until the boy faced east, then started walking, pausing every few yards to be sure the child followed. They moved like that for more than an hour, small footprints inside larger ones, life birthing life, until my cabin appeared between trunks, smoke curling faintly above. He stopped when we reached your porch, Toby finished, eyelids drooping. I knew he wanted me to knock, so I did. Silence pooled between us, thick as resin. My mind flipped through explanations, imprinting, chance, desperation. but each sounded flimsy against the image of that animal flattening itself against winter to warm a human child. "So he saved you," I murmured. Toby nodded once, fighting sleep. "He's not done," he added, already drifting. "He still has something to show us." A chill rippled over my scalp. I tucked the blanket tighter and watched his lashes settle. Outside, wind worried the eaves, but beneath it, I imagined lighter footfalls, pacing patiently, waiting for whatever came next. I wanted to believe the ordeal had ended now that the boy was safe inside, but somewhere deep I sensed this was only an intermission, one calm breath before the forest spoke again in a voice older than fire. I figured the wolf had already worked his wonder, yet the day was young, and the wild was not finished rewriting its own rules. "Weren't you scared?" I asked once Toby's color returned, the mug of broth steady in his small hands. He shook his head, expression soft but certain. "He growled," he said, voice thin as smoke, "but not at me. He was protecting me." The words cracked something in me. I crouched beside the cot, listening as the boy's eyes drifted beyond the log walls, back into night. The storm had finally burned itself out, leaving the forest in a hush so deep the snowflakes seemed to fall in slow motion. Toby lay curled beneath the cedar bough, pressed to the wolf's ribs, heartbeat sinking to heartbeat. An hour, maybe two, of fragile peace ticked past. Then the stillness shattered. Branches snapped somewhere uphill, a thrashing like a bulldozer made of muscle and gristle. Toby felt the wolf's entire body stiffen beneath his hands, heat turning to electric tension. A muskier scent, earth and rage, rolled down on the wind. Moonlight sifted through rags of cloud, and in that pale wash a shape lumbered into view. A boar, huge, scarred, its tusks thick as pick handles, eyes lit with the dull red of hunger turned mean. Winter drives pigs mad. They'll gore a bear if feeds run thin. The animal flung its head side to side, breath pumping in ragged puffs. The wolf stood in one fluid motion, positioning his body square between tusks and child. He didn't snarl outright. Instead, a deep growl rooted somewhere in his chest rumbled outward, low as a diesel engine idling on a frozen morning. Toby felt it more than heard it, the vibration settling into his bones like a living oath. "Nothing will touch you while I breathe." The boar slashed the crusted snow, showering sparks of ice. It lunged, half charge, half bluff. The wolf answered with a volcanic bark that rolled across the clearing like thunder detonating just overhead. Hackles rose, tail stiff as rebar. He advanced 2 deliberate steps, forcing the boar to reconsider the shape of courage. For 3 heartbeats, predator and predator measured each other. Toby said he could feel fear tear at the edges of his mind, yet somehow the heat radiating off the wolf anchored him, held him still. Then the wolf lifted his muzzle and howled. Not the searching cry I'd heard the night before, but a flare of sound that cut through the cold, a blade honed with iron and warning. The boar faltered, nostrils quivering. One more snort, more question than threat, and the beast broke away, crashing into underbrush, leaving silence like a crater behind. Only when the last twig snapped did the wolf's stance soften. He circled Toby, nosing the boy's cheek, inspecting for harm. Satisfied, he lay beside him again, flanked tight to the child's spine, and the dark knitted itself shut. "That's when I knew he'd keep me safe," Toby murmured, eyes sparkling with a strange mixture of wonder and fatigue. "He was my wall." I swallowed, tasting envy in the back of my throat. Envy for a trust I'd never earned from any creature, human or otherwise. "And in the morning?" Toby's face brightened. He stood up before the sun climbed, looked at me, then started trotting away. He'd go a bit, stop, glance over his shoulder until I got up and followed, like breadcrumbs made of footprints. They traveled single file along a narrow animal path, weaving between fir trunks iced in silver. Whenever the boy lagged, the wolf doubled back, bumping his head against Toby's leg to prod him forward. They crossed a frozen creek, footprints mapping perfect paired constellations in the frost. A hawk screeched overhead. The wolf's ears twitched, but he never left the boy's side. After nearly an hour, the trees thinned, and smoke from my chimney stitched the sky. The wolf halted at the tree line, head high, as though checking unseen traffic. He nudged Toby one final time toward the porch. That done, he eased into the fringe of shadows, still close enough for the child to feel, but giving him the dignity to make the last few steps alone. Toby raised the mug to his lips, blew on the surface, and offered a small, exhausted smile. He knew you were there, waiting. I pressed a hand to the window pane, gaze flicking over the clearing where empty snow glared back. Part of me argued we'd navigated the worst. That boy and beast had intersected by cosmic accident, and the lines had now separated. But memory of that previous night's eyes, cedar fire glint and patient judgment, whispered a different geometry. Even now I could picture the wolf pacing just beyond sight, arc of duty unbroken. The boy's tale had stitched new rules into my blood, that loyalty could leap species and guardianship could wear a wolf's skin. I caught my reflection in the glass, grizzled man, trembling shoulders, and realized fear was no longer the dominant drum in my chest. It was expectation, a readiness for whatever next page the wilderness might flip open. I told myself the wolf had merely happened upon the child and lingered out of curiosity, nothing more. But as Toby's story settled into the corners of the room like falling ash, I understood. The animal had guided him here on purpose, straight into my waiting hands, and that meant the real reason for this encounter was still prowling the edge of morning, unseen, unfinished. We left the cabin as the sun cleared the spruce tops, icy needles flashing like shards of broken glass. I gave Toby my spare parka. The sleeves swallowed his wrists, but he beamed the way kids do when wearing something that smells of wood smoke and safety. A mile south ran a logging road, and 6 miles beyond that, a paved highway, our lifeline to a ranger station with radios and rescue crews. Toby slipped his mittened hand into mine. The forest inhaled, exhaled, settling into its slow daylight rhythm. Chickadees burst like shaken pepper over the branches. Somewhere far off, an axe-beak raven croaked, a note of warning or welcome, I couldn't tell. We walked single file along the frozen creek. On our left, 50 yards beyond a picket of young birch, a gray shadow kept pace. The wolf, nose low, ears swiveling. He never crossed the invisible line between wilderness and our narrow trail, yet his presence rode my spine like a warm blade. Every time Toby stumbled over a root, the wolf paused, eyes bright with a shepherd's patience. "You think he'll stay with us all the way?" I whispered. The boy considered, as though consulting internal weather. "Until Daddy's safe, yes." An hour in, the creek bent west, and the trees thinned into a meadow shaved by recent wind. Knee-deep drifts glazed the clearing, broken only by our path and a second parallel seam of paw prints, fresh, sharp-edged. The wolf trotted nearer the margin, close enough for me to hear the snow squeak under his pads. I half expected him to veer off, claim distance now that dawn and calm had returned. Instead, he slowed, lifted his nose, and bristled. I followed his line of sight and felt my chest cave. At the meadow's far edge knelt a man in a ripped orange vest, shoulders heaving as if each breath were a punishment. Snow clung to his beard, and his gloveless fingers combed the drifts in frantic, pointless patterns, the shape of shattered hope. "Daddy!" Toby shouted, voice cracking the hush like a dropped plate. He wrenched free of my grasp and ran. The man's head snapped up. Eyes wide with disbelief, he lurched to his feet, boots slipping. Father and son collided, collapsing into the snow, their sobs spilling into each other so fast they blurred. The scene punched something loose inside me, old regrets, unspoken apologies, until my own throat tightened. Off to one side, the wolf halted, muscles taut, tail level. He watched the reunion with the stillness of a statue waiting for a sculptor's final strike. Steam curled from his nostrils. Each exhale looked like surrender. I walked closer, cautious not to crowd the moment. The father rocked Toby against his chest, murmuring broken sentences. Thought I'd lost you. Never forgive myself. Miracle, my boy. My brave boy. Bedrock words, the kind you hammer into your soul when all other architecture collapses. At last, Toby drew back, tears hanging like quicksilver from his lashes. He pointed. Daddy, he saved me. The man's gaze followed the finger and landed on the wolf. I watched 80 emotions collide behind his eyes. Instinctive fear, disbelief, raw gratitude. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. The wolf absorbed the stare, unblinking. Something passed between them, flinty, fleeting, but real. Then he did something I will never forget. He bowed his head, just once, the way one warrior might salute another across a battlefield neither wished for. I took a step forward, voice ragged. You helped us find him, I said, half statement, half prayer. Thank you. The wolf's ears flicked toward me. Sunlight caught in his eyes, revealing layers I had no words for. Exhaustion, yes. Whatever guardian task drove him had taxed bone and spirit, but also unbroken dignity and something deeper still, the calm of a creature who knows the weight of his choices and would carry them again. In that gaze was everything, weariness, grace, and the unmistakable spark of understanding that he had done a good thing. Toby's father whispered, Dear God. He struggled to stand, one arm still around the child. Perhaps he meant to approach, perhaps to kneel in thanks. I'll never know. The wolf sensed the motion, gave one final, lingering look, first to the boy, then to me, and turned. He moved back the way we'd come, loping along the tree line. No hurry, no furtive glances, just a soldier dismissed after the last battle, heading home through fields still heavy with smoke. When distance blurred him to gray watercolors, I cupped my hands to my mouth. Thank you! The words tore out, echoing against the drums of pine. Far across the white, he paused, turned his head. Our eyes met for the third and, I felt, final time. The wind caught my breath, my chest filled with something too big for words. Respect, awe, a sudden faith in the threads that tie separate hearts across species. Then he vanished into the timber, his shape folding into shadow the way a story folds into memory. Toby's father sagged, clutching his son as though afraid the universe might snatch him back. I helped them to the road, flagged down a ranger snowcat an hour later, relayed the impossible tale to men whose faces flickered between skepticism and wonder. Paperwork would follow, statements, maybe headlines, but the clearing was already filling with fresh snow, erasing tracks, smoothing the earth to silence. Somewhere beyond that hush padded a wolf, whose name I would never know, but whose service was carved forever into 3 human hearts. And in the embers of his final look, I felt a promise ignite. I would carry his story forward, guard it like a flame against the darkness of disbelief. The ranger snowcat groaned along the icy ruts, heater roaring, metal treads clanking like distant church bells. Inside the cab we huddled on a bench meant for gear, not people. Toby sat between his father and me, bundled in a thermal blanket the rangers had handed over, cheeks still blotched with windburn, but eyes bright, alive. His dad, Grant, he'd murmured when we exchanged names, kept one gloved hand locked around the boy's shoulder as if a single blink might tear the child away again. Grant's lips moved silently, inventorying every freckle, every eyelash, as though confirming the miracle by itemizing it. Then, suddenly, words burst out, raw and shaking. He followed you? All night? The question was aimed at Toby, but ricocheted around the cabin, lodging in each of us. That animal, he stayed with you, protected you? Toby nodded, almost shy, as if admitting to something wonderful he wasn't sure grown-ups were allowed to believe. I'd be dead if he hadn't, he said, voice small but steady. He's good, Daddy. Not bad. Just good. Grant's shoulders tremored. He tried to speak again, but what came was a rasp that collapsed into a sob. He turned his face to the plexiglass window, shoulders quaking. For a moment, only the engine filled the space. I'd seen men cry, drunk hunters, grieving widowers, soldiers at graves, but nothing prepared me for the rawness of that father sound in a steel box rumbling through subarctic twilight. It was like the forest itself had bent and snapped inside him. He wiped his face with the back of a mitten, tried to laugh it off, failed. We don't even protect our own that way, he whispered, voice husky, half accusation, half confession. Not like he did. Not like that. Toby slid closer, rested his head on the broad chest that shook under layers of fleece. Daddy, he was tired, I could tell, but he kept standing between me and everything else, like a wall. Grant's breath hitched again. A wall, he echoed, tasting the word, bruising it. He looked at me, eyes red-rimmed, searching for adult corroboration. You saw him. You felt it, right? All of it, I said quietly. He tracked us to the meadow, waited till you had your son in your arms, then walked away like a sentry off duty. My voice hummed with equal parts awe and something like envy. He knew. Grant exhaled, long and ragged. Why? The syllable drifted, helpless. I thought of territorial maps, predator-prey charts, ethology lectures, all the neat lines we draw around animal behavior so we can sleep at night believing we understand the wild. Then I pictured those cedar-colored eyes meeting mine in the clearing, carrying something that refused to fit any lecture slide. I don't know, I answered. Maybe because he could. Maybe because the forest wanted it done, and he's the only one who listened. Grant bowed his head, pressing his lips to Toby's hair. We're told not to give animals our human feelings, he muttered. But if that wasn't mercy, what the hell was it? No one replied. The ranger at the wheel kept his gaze ahead, jaw clenched, pretending not to eavesdrop while every muscle in his face said he was turning the story over like a stone that might hatch. Snow pelted the windshield, wipers squealing. The heater coughed, then surged, warm air smelling of diesel and wool. For a stretch we rode in silence, the kind thick enough to sculpt. Finally Grant cleared his throat. I'm going to tell them, he said, defiant as a newly forged vow. Reporters, officials, whoever asks, I'll tell them a wolf saved my boy. Toby's hand found his father's, squeezed once. He deserves people to know, the child said, eyes half-lidded. Grant looked at me again, softer now. You'll back me up? With everything I've got, I promised, and felt the truth solder inside my ribs. Even so, a small voice whispered caution. The world likes its boundaries solid. Predator, prey, hero, villain. A story that erases lines invites knives of ridicule. I pushed that fear aside. The wolf deserved better than our cowardice. The snowcat crested a rise, and ahead a cluster of satellite dishes and sodium lamps bloomed, the ranger outpost. Relief washed over Grant's face, but behind it lingered an older emotion, almost grief, as though crossing back into human infrastructure meant leaving behind a cathedral we barely understood. Toby dozed against his father's chest, breaths even. Grant stroked the boy's hair, tears drying into salt. We spend our whole lives teaching kids the world is dangerous, he whispered, gazing through me. But out there, danger kept him warm. My chest twisted. Outside, the tree line slid away into gray, and for a heartbeat I imagined a lone figure pacing just inside the shadows, ears forward, mission unfinished. I couldn't shake the feeling that our roles had reversed out there, that it was the wolf who'd been the teacher, and we the children clinging to simpler stories. The snowcat slowed, treads crunching to a stop. Doors clanged open, radios crackled. Men in orange parkas approached with stretchers and thermoses. Civilization's safety net unfurled. But as we stepped into the glare of floodlights, I caught Grant's whisper to his son, a fragile prayer wrapped in thankfulness. "We'll never forget him, Toby. Never. Because now we know how love walks when it wears the shape of a wolf." And I realized the true rescue wasn't finished. It had only just begun, threading through a father's heart, a child's memory, and a witness who could no longer pretend the world was simple. The city swallowed me whole long before the train hissed to its final stop. Neon pooled in puddles, traffic howled, and somewhere above the smog, a winter moon tried to remind me of other kinds of silence. But its voice was throttled by sirens and exhaust. I should have felt relief pressing keys into the lock of my apartment, but every turn of metal sounded wrong, like hammering nails through birdsong. I showered twice, scalding hot, as if enough steam could strip the taiga from my skin. It didn't. Long after midnight, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug I didn't remember filling, and opened my laptop. YouTube brightened the room in nervous blues. I typed, "Wolf protects child." Results spilled across the screen. Cartoon clips, shaky cell phone miracles, documentaries with portentous voiceovers. I clicked one, then another, but each left me colder. They were too perfect or too staged, tidy arcs that ended where comfort prefers. None carried the smell of cedar smoke breath, the thunder-quiet weight of a real flank shielding a real heartbeat. Video after video, my chest tightened. I wanted an algorithm to hand me logic, a study, a pattern, a line graph plotting altruism against food scarcity. I wanted to prove what I'd seen was statistically plausible, so I could file it away and sleep. Explanation never came. The forest flickered on the screen in pixelated fragments, but the living truth remained out there, pacing just beyond reach. At 4 a.m., I shut the lid and stared at the faint wolf print smear my thumb had left on the aluminum. The city beyond the window never rested, yet my apartment felt tomb quiet. That same hush from the clearing had followed me here, an uninvited companion sitting on the couch, reminding me that every honk, every elevator ding, was a thin veneer over something older and far more articulate. By dawn, I gave up negotiating with sleep. I pulled a leather-bound notebook from a drawer, gift from a friend who said I needed hobbies, not prescriptions, and uncapped a pen. The words bled out fast, messy. I watched a wolf rescue a child, not for meat, not for favor, simply because he could. Ink pooled, dried into a jagged constellation. My hand kept moving. He stood between tusks and skin, cold and warmth, night and the next morning. He looked at me with eyes that carried knowledge deeper than the riverbed. I am back among concrete, but the howl is still inside my lungs, echoing every time I breathe. The pen stilled. I read the lines aloud, half ashamed of their tremor, half amazed they existed outside my skull. They felt truer than any map. A notification pinged on my phone, news push about market futures. I slid it aside. Then another buzzed, group chat debating football trades. I muted it. The world I'd returned to suddenly felt trivial, like paper walls around the engine of a star. My gaze drifted to the blank page beneath the fresh ink. I thought of Grant and Toby, of the silent vow we'd made beneath that meadow sky, to speak the truth, even if it sounded like myth. The wolf had delivered a life back to human arms. The least we could do was deliver his story whole. So I angled my phone camera toward the notebook, snapped a photo of those raw lines, and opened the video app I almost never used. Hands trembling, I hit record. The lens caught my apartment's cheap lamp, the shadows under my eyes, the grainy dawn pushing through blinds. I drew a breath that still tasted of spruce. "If your heart's pounding right now," I said, voice roughened by sleepless wonder, "you get it." Subscribe to this channel. Here we tell the truths about nature, the ones the textbooks forget, the ones that change you forever. The red icon winked off. I stared at the thumbnail, an ordinary man in an ordinary kitchen, except for the wildfire flickering behind his pupils. Then I hit post, letting the current carry it where it would. Maybe skeptics would swarm, maybe algorithms would bury it. Yet somewhere, someone with city noise ringing in their ears might feel the hush slip in between beats and realize the wild still keeps its own ledger of miracles. I closed the notebook. Outside, traffic thickened, commuters funneling toward screens and deadlines. I shouldered my coat anyway, stepped onto the balcony, and let winter air cut clean through the urban staleness. Cars hissed below, a jet roared overhead, but beneath it all I heard something else, steady and patient, paw steps pacing the border of memory, ensuring I would not forget. The wolf had guarded a child through a storm. Now he guarded the silence inside me. And every time the city threatened to drown that silence, I would return here, pen ready, to write another line in the ledger he began, until words, like tracks in fresh snow, led someone else to a clearing where disbelief finally knelt before wonder. When the winter local rattled away from the whistle stop and darkness closed like theater curtains, I felt the forest slip its old key into my bones. 30 days had hardened city noises back into habits, but the silence here cracked them like thin ice. I hiked the same narrow track to the ranger cabin, headlights of my headlamp bobbing over snow crust. Every boot crunch said, "Welcome home." Every shadow said, "Remember." The stove was just as I'd left it, rusty door, iron lungs ready to breathe heat. Yet the cabin felt smaller, as if the miracle had swollen its walls and then followed me out, leaving an ache where awe once swirled. The first 2 nights nothing happened but ordinary winter sounds, owls gossiping, frost ticking logs, my own pulse drumming stories I'd already told a million strangers online. I should have slept, but my ears kept reaching past the roof for one note only a month old. I began to doubt, to wonder if memory had exaggerated tones, stretched silhouettes. Maybe what I'd witnessed was huge only inside my skull. On the third and final evening, the moon rose bruised purple behind the pines, and the hush thickened until even my breath sounded foreign. I stepped onto the porch, mug steaming, and that's when the world folded open. A single resonant howl rolled across the treetops. It started low, climbed, held, precisely the pitch that had frozen my life in place 40 nights ago. I didn't think. I grabbed my coat, left the door swinging on its hinges, and followed the sound into the dark. Snow reached my calves, erased the old trail, but the howl guided me like a lantern made of vibration. I pushed through birch branches that glittered with rime. The forest exhaled clouds of silence between each crunch of my boots, as if giving me space to decide whether courage or common sense mattered more. Another howl, closer, shorter, almost a question, pulled me forward into the same meadow where Toby had collided with salvation. Moonlight washed the clearing silver, and there he was. He stood exactly where father and son had wept, legs straight, head high, fur limbed with cold fire. Not a ghost, not a dream, but muscle and breath making visible the very idea of guardianship. His eyes caught the moon and threw it back at me in 2 cedar-colored coins. He did not advance, he did not retreat. He simply watched. I tried to speak, but the air left my throat a strangled mist. Instead, I raised a hand, the same gesture we offered distant friends we're afraid to scare with closeness. The wolf's ears flicked. Snowflakes landed on his back and stayed, unwilling to melt off such measured heat. Seconds stretched until they felt like the length of winter itself. I took one step, then another. He didn't flinch, yet some invisible boundary hummed between us, a wire strung with unspoken rules. I stopped a dozen yards away, heart hammering instructions my tongue couldn't translate. He inhaled, a sound barely more than wind through reeds, and turned his head toward the north line of trees. There, half in shadow, half in moon glow, sat a single paw print, pristine, enormous, pressed into untouched drift, deliberate evidence that what you see is real. He looked back at me once more, as if to say, there will always be tracks if you choose to follow, then pivoted, glide-stepped into the dark, and vanished. I stood rooted, the lonely paw print between us like a punctuation mark the forest itself had stamped onto blank snow. Not a farewell, more an ellipsis, proof the story continues wherever wonder is willing to walk. My throat unlocked. "If you can hear me," I whispered into the black timber. "I remember you. I understand." A wind curled through the meadow, lifting powder into brief galaxies. When it settled, the clearing was again only snow and moonlight, but I was not the same man who'd entered it. The cabin behind me might still be empty wood, the city beyond might still grind its gears, but somewhere an intelligence wider than language had nodded, and that nod would echo in every choice I made from here on. I knelt beside the paw print, traced its rim with a gloved finger, and felt the pulse of the universe beat once beneath the crust. Had anyone else described such moment to me yesterday, I would have laughed, gently, certain they'd mistaken myth for memory. Now I carried proof, etched deeper than bone. I brushed fresh snow over the track, not to erase it, but to seal it, the way you close a locket around something precious. If someone told me this tale, I'd never believe it. But I saw it, felt it, stood inside it. And now I know we are not alone in this world. There is someone, something, wiser than we dare imagine. If you too have witnessed a miracle in the wild, write, "Animals remember kindness." When I first saw her, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. It was early morning. The storm from the night before had buried the cabin in white silence, the kind of silence that presses on your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. I had just stoked the fire and poured coffee when something, I don't even know what, made me turn toward the door. And that's when it happened. She was standing there, a wolf, not pacing, not snarling, just standing. Her paws sunk deep in the snow, her fur dusted with frost, steam curling from her breath like smoke from a chimney. She wasn't just looking in my direction, she was looking at me, and in that moment, I swear my heart stopped, because I realized she wasn't there by accident. You ever have one of those moments when the world tilts under your feet? When you feel small, like the rules you thought you knew just shattered? That was me, frozen in the middle of that cabin, staring through the glass into eyes that didn't belong to any wild animal I'd ever seen. They were yellow, sharp, and yet there was something human in them. Fear hit first, a cold rush down my spine. Every instinct screamed, "Don't move, don't even breathe. I live in wolf country. I know what they're capable of. One wrong move, and you don't make it to the door handle." But then, confusion crept in, because she didn't growl, didn't bare her teeth, didn't lunge. She just stood there, chest heaving softly, her breath fogging up the morning air. Snowflakes clung to her fur like bits of broken glass. She wasn't hunting me, she wasn't angry. She looked tired. That's what stopped me from grabbing the rifle. Something in the way she held herself, ears low, tail not tucked in fear, but lowered in something else, something I couldn't name yet. And then those eyes, locked on mine like she was trying to tell me something. I remember whispering out loud, like a fool talking to an empty room, "What do you want?" No answer, of course, just the wind hissing through the pines and the faint crackle of fire behind me. I thought for sure, any second now, she'd turn and vanish into the trees. Just like that, like a ghost in the snow. That's what wolves do. They disappear. But she didn't move. Not an inch. And that was the first time the fear gave way to something else. Something heavier. Something that felt like the weight of a secret pressing on my chest. Because the longer I stared, the more I realized she didn't look like a predator. She looked desperate. I can't explain it better than that. There was a kind of stillness in her that didn't belong to a creature of the wild. It wasn't hunger driving her. It wasn't rage. It was need. That's when it happened. The sound that changed everything. She whimpered. Just once. Low, broken, like the air leaking out of a torn bag. And I swear, it wasn't the sound of an animal warning you off. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. My stomach turned cold. My hands started to shake. Not from fear anymore, but from something deeper. Because that sound didn't belong in this frozen silence. That sound belonged in the throat of something begging for help. And that's when the questions started pounding in my head like fists on a locked door. Why is she here? Why my door? Why isn't she attacking? I didn't move. Couldn't. Just stood there, one hand gripping the edge of the table like if I let go, I'd fall straight through the floor. If anyone had walked in at that moment and told me I was dreaming, I would have believed them. Because this wasn't how nature worked. Wolves don't come to humans. Wolves don't ask. But this one did. And that was the moment everything I thought I knew about the wild cracked wide open. I don't know how long we stood like that. Me on one side of the door, her on the other. The fire popped behind me, but I couldn't feel the heat anymore. Every second stretched like a wire about to snap. And then, without really deciding, I moved. My fingers brushed the door handle. It felt like ice under my skin. My heart was pounding so hard it drowned out everything. The wind outside, the blood in my ears, even my own thoughts. The old hinges groaned as I cracked the door open an inch, then two. Cold air knifed through the gap, stinging my face. She didn't flinch, no growl, no flash of teeth. Instead, she stepped back, slow, careful, like she didn't want to scare me. That froze me more than any snarl could have. Wolves don't retreat, not for humans, but she did. Then she turned, not all the way, just enough to show me her flank before she looked over her shoulder. And God help me, if I didn't know better, I'd say she was waiting for me. Everything inside me screamed, stay inside, bolt the door, throw wood on the fire, forget this ever happened. But then her eyes caught mine again, eyes that didn't belong to a killer in the wild, but something else, something raw, something that almost felt like hope. And just like that, my legs betrayed me. I stepped out onto the porch. Snow squeaked under my boots. The air bit like a fist of needles. Every instinct told me this was madness. Wolves aren't pets. They're not messengers from fairy tales. They're survival written in fur and bone. But she didn't move, didn't run. She took 2 more steps, slow as smoke rising from a dying fire. Then she stopped and looked back at me again, this time holding my gaze so long I forgot how to breathe. And then she did it again. That sound, that broken whimper that didn't belong to a creature of dominance. It belonged to something stripped bare of everything except one thing, a plea. I almost closed the door right then, almost told myself, this is insane. Let her vanish back into the trees where she belongs. But then she whimpered again, softer this time. Almost fragile. And I swear on everything I am, it felt like that sound reached inside my chest and squeezed. I don't know what part of me moved first, the part that feared her, or the part that couldn't bear the thought of turning away. Maybe it was both, tangled together like roots. All I know is that a second later, I was grabbing my coat from the hook, shoving my arms through the sleeves with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I stepped off the porch. The cold hit me like a hammer. The snow crunched under my boots, deep and soft, swallowing sound. The storm had eased, but the sky hung heavy with gray, like the world hadn't finished deciding what to do with me yet. And her? She just stood there, 10 paces ahead, tail low but steady, body coiled with a tension that didn't feel dangerous. It felt desperate. And those eyes, God, those eyes. They weren't wild. They weren't tame. They were pleading, like she was saying one word without a sound. Please. The first step off the clearing felt like crossing a line I could never come back from. The snow was deeper here, swallowing my boots almost to the knee. The cold wrapped around me like a steel trap, biting through layers of wool and leather as if they weren't there. The storm had passed, but the world wasn't calm. It was listening. The trees loomed like dark pillars, their branches heavy with snow, bending under the weight of silence. Every sound, the crunch of my boots, the rasp of my breath, felt too loud, like the forest didn't want me there. And ahead of me, her. The wolf moved like a shadow, sliding over the snow with a grace that made my own stumbling look pitiful. Every few steps, she'd stop, turn her head just enough to meet my eyes, then keep moving, checking, waiting. I don't know why that unsettled me more than if she'd just vanished. Wolves don't care if you follow. They disappear. They want to disappear, but not her. Every time I thought, this is it. She's gone. I can go back, lock the door, forget this ever happened. She'd stop again, just enough to pull me deeper. What am I doing? I muttered under my breath, the words puffing into the air in little clouds of fear. This is insane. No answer, of course. Just the creak of branches shifting under snow. My mind kept spitting out warnings like sparks from a dying fire. Wolves are dangerous. Wolves lure prey. Wolves don't ask, they take. And yet, here I was, following her, because something in her eyes back at the cabin had unmoored me from everything I thought I knew. I thought about turning back a dozen times in that first 5 minutes. My fingers were going numb inside my gloves. My legs ached from forcing through the drifts. And the weight of that silence, it was crushing. But then, it came. The sound that snapped every nerve in my body to attention. Faint at first, so faint I thought it was the wind threading through the pines. A thin, quivering sound that didn't belong to the creak of wood or the moan of snow. It was a cry, software fragile, broken like glass underfoot. I stopped dead. My breath caught so hard it burned. It wasn't the wolf in front of me. She stood still now, ears pricked, eyes locked on mine like she knew I'd heard it too. And that's when my stomach twisted. Because that sound, it wasn't human. But it wasn't wild in the way it should have been either. It was something small, something suffering, a whine, coming from deeper in the woods. The cold didn't matter anymore. The fear didn't matter. Only that sound clawing at my insides, dragging me forward whether I wanted to go or not. The wolf turned again, her body taut with urgency, and started moving faster now. Her paws skimmed the snow like she was born of it, and I stumbled after her, lungs screaming, legs burning. I thought for sure she'd just vanish between the trees, leave me stranded, alone in this frozen nowhere. That's what would have made sense. That's what nature does. It leaves you behind. But she didn't. She waited. Every few yards, she'd stop, glance back, eyes burning gold through the gray light, pulling me like a rope knotted around my chest. And all I could think, over and over, was one question pounding like a drum inside my skull. Where is she leading me? The cry grew louder as we moved deeper into the woods, a thin thread of sound unraveling through the trees. Every time I thought we were close, it shifted, like the forest itself was trying to hide it. Then the wolf stopped. She froze so suddenly I almost stumbled into her. Her body stiffened, ears forward, nose cutting the air. And then I saw it. At first, it looked like nothing but a heap of broken branches under a crust of snow. But then a small movement flickered from beneath, and my chest seized. It was alive. A pup, tiny, gray, legs thrashing weakly under the weight of a fallen tree limb that looked heavy enough to pin a grown man. The snow around it was churned and red where bark had scraped skin. Its cries were muffled, thin, desperate, and in that moment, everything inside me tilted. This wolf, this mother, she hadn't come to hunt. She hadn't come to fight. She'd come to beg. I swear on my own life, that's what it was. A wild creature of teeth and instinct, asking for help. My breath fogged the air as she moved closer to the pup, pawing at the snow in frantic, useless swipes. The branch didn't budge. Then she stopped, slowly turned her head toward me, and looked straight into me. Not at me, into me. And what I saw in those eyes made my throat close. It wasn't rage. It wasn't command. It was something I didn't think nature allowed in a predator like her. It was trust, and God, that hit harder than fear ever could. My hands shook as I dropped to my knees in the snow. The cold bit through my jeans like teeth. Every cell in my body screamed, "What are you doing? You're on your knees in front of a wolf." She stood inches away, chest heaving, steam curling off her fur. One lunge and I was done, but she didn't move, except for her eyes, locked on mine like a lifeline stretched between two species that had no business sharing it. I grabbed the thickest branch I could find and wedged it under the fallen limb. My boots slipped. The wood groaned. My shoulders burned like fire, but I pushed harder, teeth clenched until they ached. And then, finally, the branch shifted with a crack that split the silence like a gunshot. Snow tumbled, the weight lifted, the pup scrambled free, legs wobbling, collapsing into the snow with a whimper that sliced me in two. The mother was on him in a heartbeat, nuzzling his neck, licking the blood from his fur with a tenderness that made my chest ache. The pup pressed into her, trembling, alive. I sat back on my heels, breath sawing out of me in clouds, my heart trying to climb through my ribs. My gloves were torn, my hands stung with splinters. I didn't care, because I'd just done something no sane man would believe. I'd saved a wolf's child, and lived. For one fragile moment, I thought it was over. I thought that was all she wanted, that she'd take her pup and vanish into the white silence, and I'd stumble home and spend the rest of my life wondering if it was real. But then she did something that made my blood run cold. She looked at me again, not quick, not fleeting, held my gaze, her eyes burning gold in the gray light. And then she turned, started walking. Not slow this time, not careful, faster, urgent. I stared after her, my breath still tearing at my throat, my brain screaming. What now? What could possibly be next? The pup limped beside her, pressing into her side, alive but shaky. She didn't look back this time, just moved forward, tail low, steps slicing into the snow like sentences in a language I wasn't meant to read. I hesitated for half a heartbeat. My body begged me to stop, to go home, to forget. But something deeper, something primal, dragged me to my feet and pulled me after her. Because I knew one thing now with a certainty that shook me to the bone. She saved her pup, but she wasn't done with me. I thought the first miracle was enough for one lifetime. Saving that pup felt like stepping through some invisible door, a door that should have slammed shut the second it opened. But it didn't, because the she-wolf kept moving, and like a fool, or maybe something worse, something I can't name, I kept following. My lungs burned with every breath, my boots were soaked, my legs trembling from dragging through knee-deep snow, but I couldn't stop. The trees thinned, shadows stretching long in the gray light, until we broke into a clearing that looked like the mouth of some old, buried secret. And that's where I saw him. At first, I thought it was just a dark shape sprawled in the snow, another fallen log or patch of stone, but then it moved, just barely, just enough for the truth to slam into me like a fist. A wolf, huge, male, his fur matted with blood, his sides heaving in shallow, ragged breaths, his leg twisted at an angle that made my stomach lurch, the steel glint of a wire trap biting into his flesh. I stopped dead. Everything in me screamed to back away. This was the part where things turned, where nature reminded me that mercy has a price. But the mother didn't look at me like prey. She didn't look at me like a threat. She looked at me like the answer. And that was the moment my fear gave way to something bigger, something that shook me harder than the cold ever could. Because what kind of world was this, where a wolf would put her life, her family, her future in the hands of a man? Slowly, I dropped to my knees, every nerve on fire. The male wolf's eyes burned into me, gold and furious. A growl rumbled low in his throat, a sound that carried the weight of death in it. I whispered, God knows why. Maybe to him, maybe to myself. Easy, I'm not here to hurt you. My hands shook as I dug into the snow, searching for the steel jaws that held him. The wire was slick with blood, biting deep into muscle. One wrong move, and those teeth would be in my throat before I could scream. I worked the branch under the trap, using every ounce of strength I had left. My gloves tore, my knuckles split open, the cold biting into raw flesh. The wolf snarled, his breath hot on my arm, his teeth flashing inches from my skin. But he didn't lunge, not once, because maybe, just maybe, he understood what I was doing. The wire gave with a metallic snap that echoed like a gunshot through the clearing. The male wolf collapsed into the snow, legs twitching, breath sawing in and out. Blood stained the white around him like spilled ink. And then, silence. The mother moved to him, nudging his neck, licking his wound with a gentleness that made my chest ache all over again. The pup limped forward, pressing against his father's side, their bodies folding together like pieces of something too fragile to break apart. And me? I just knelt there, staring at them, my breath burning in my lungs, my hands trembling so hard I couldn't feel the ground beneath them, because in that frozen clearing, surrounded by blood and snow and the steam of living breath, I understood something I'd never believed before. In that moment, I wasn't a man, and they weren't beasts. We were the same. I thought that was it. I thought she wanted nothing else from me, that I'd done the unthinkable twice and the story would end there, me staggering back to my cabin with a secret I'd carry to the grave. But then she turned, slowly, deliberately, and started walking, not into the forest this time, back toward my cabin. I swear, the blood in my veins turned to ice, because if everything up to now had shattered the rules, this was something else entirely, and I had no idea what waited on the other side of it. I don't know how long I followed her after that clearing. Time had no meaning anymore, just the rhythm of my boots crunching in the snow, the ache in my legs, and the silhouette of that wolf cutting through the trees ahead of me. The pup limped behind her, the male trailing slow, but alive. And every few steps, she'd glance back, just enough to make sure I was still there, like she wasn't done with me yet. The forest thinned. The sky cracked open in pale gray light. And then I saw it through the trees, the dark line of the cabin's roof, hunched under a heavy quilt of snow. For the first time in hours, I felt something close to relief. My hands were numb, my throat was raw, my body begged for heat, for fire, for the simple safety of four walls and a door that locked. But that relief didn't last, because the she-wolf didn't veer off into the trees. She walked straight toward the cabin. My stomach clenched so hard it felt like a fist in my gut. Every nerve screamed, "Number. This isn't right. This isn't how the story ends." I slowed as the porch came into view, my boots dragging through the drifts like they weighed 100 pounds. She climbed the steps without hesitation and stopped in front of the door. My door, the same one she'd stood before that morning like some impossible omen. And then she turned, not to leave, not to lunge, to look at me. Her eyes burned through the gray light, molten gold and shadow, holding me still in a way no weapon ever could. Then she turned her head again, toward the trees. That's when I heard it, the soft crunch of snow from the dark beyond the clearing, low shapes slipping through the trees like smoke. My breath caught, my chest locking tight as the shadows took form. 4 of them, 4 wolves. They emerged in silence, spreading out across the edge of the clearing like sentinels carved from frost and shadow. Their breath curled in silver ribbons, their eyes flickered like lanterns in the dusk, and not one of them moved toward me, not one of them bared teeth. They sat, just sat, as if the world had turned upside down and predators had become protectors. I stood frozen on the porch, every thought in my head stripped down to static. My pulse hammered like a trapped bird against my ribs. This wasn't nature. This wasn't anything I'd ever seen or believed in. And then the truth hit me so hard my knees almost buckled. She'd brought me home. Not because she wanted something more, not because I was in danger, because in some wild, unfathomable way, she wanted to make sure I was safe. They didn't owe me anything, but they came to protect me. For a long time, no one moved. Not me, not them. Just the sound of the wind combing through the trees, the soft whisper of snow shifting under the weight of the world, turned strange. Finally, the she-wolf stepped down from the porch. She didn't look at me again, didn't need to. She moved back toward the trees, her pup limping at her side, the male following like a shadow stitched from pain and pride. The others rose and fell in behind them, their bodies folding into the forest like they'd never been there at all. And just like that, they were gone. I stood there long after the last trace of them vanished, the cold gnawing at my skin, my breath hanging like smoke in the gray air. I thought that was the last time I'd see them. I thought the story ended there. But nature had one more truth to show me. The night passed in fragments. I don't even remember crawling into bed, only the way the fire's glow flickered against the walls like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Sleep came in broken shards, haunted by golden eyes and the weight of snow pressing down like the silence of a world that had just rewritten itself. When the light came, it wasn't the harsh glare of daylight, but the pale breath of dawn spilling across the floor. For a moment, I thought it was over. Just a dream stitched together by the storm and my own loneliness. Then I heard it. Not a sound, not really, just the absence of one, the kind of stillness that pulls you to your feet without asking why. I pulled on my coat, my boots still stiff with frost, and opened the door, and there they were. The clearing shimmered under the first blush of morning, snow like crushed glass catching the fragile light, and in the middle of it, not shadows, not ghosts, wolves, the pack, 5 of them, sitting like statues carved from bone and breath, their bodies rimed with frost, their eyes burning with something that wasn't hunger and wasn't rage, something I didn't have words for. My throat locked. My breath stuttered, and then she moved, the she-wolf, slow, deliberate, each step carving meaning into the snow, her head low, her ears soft, not submission, not threat, something else, something that made my chest ache like a wound. I didn't move, couldn't. She stopped just a breath away, so close I could feel the heat of her life against the frozen air. Her eyes held mine, and in that molten gold was a language older than words, older than fire, older than every rule I thought I understood. And then, she touched me, just once. Her nose brushed against my hand, a feather-light press that sent a shock through my body like lightning in the dead of winter. Her touch wasn't a threat. It was gratitude, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't beg, the kind that humbles you until you don't know whether to fall to your knees or weep where you stand. And then, as quickly as it came, the moment broke. She turned. The others rose as if pulled by a silent thread, their bodies flowing back toward the trees, snow whispering under their paws. No sound, no pause, no second glance, until the forest swallowed them whole. Gone. I stood there, frozen on the porch, the wind combing cold fingers through my hair, my breath shaking like a child's. Tears burned my eyes and slid hot down my face, steam curling where they touched the winter air. Because I understood something then, something that will live under my skin until the day the earth swallows my bones. Words hit harder than fists, but her silence hit harder than any words ever could. In that silence was every truth we pretend not to know, that trust is a gift sharper than teeth, that mercy binds stronger than fear, that the wild isn't chaos, it's a language we've forgotten how to hear. A wild wolf asked for help, trusted a man, and thanked him. If I hadn't seen it myself, I'd never believe it, but I did, and I'll never be the same. If you believe animals remember kindness, right, nature never forgets. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe. This is where real stories live.